3 hours after Admiral Sirith sent her desperate message into the void, the impossible happened. Her communications officer made a sound that Sirith had never heard from a Valorian before, and it was a harmonic of pure shock mixed with disbelief. "Admiral," the officer said, "we are receiving a response." Sirith turned sharply, and her crystal form caught the dim light of the damaged bridge. "From where?" she demanded. "The nearest Valorian outpost is weeks away at maximum speed." "It is not from a Valorian." "Source, Admiral," the officer replied, and his harmonics trembled with confusion. "The signal is coming from a vessel approximately 4 light hours from our position, and it is responding on the electromagnetic spectrum." "That is impossible," Sirith said. "There are no civilized species in this region of space." "The signal is not from a civilized species, Admiral." The officer paused as if struggling to process what his instruments were telling him, at least not according to our databases, and there is no record of these beings anywhere in our files. Sirith moved to the communication station and examined the data herself, and what she saw made no sense. The signal was crude and filled with static, and it used compression methods that Valorian children learn to surpass in their first year of education. But it was definitely a response to her distress call. "Can you translate it?" Sirith asked. "The translation matrices are struggling, Admiral, but I believe I can produce a rough interpretation." The officer worked his station, and after a moment a voice filled the bridge. It was harsh and strange, and nothing like the musical tones of civilized communication, and the words came through choppy and broken, but understandable. "Unidentified fleet, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Union vessel Stubborn Defiance, and we received your distress signal. And what is your current situation?" Sirith stared at the communications display as if it had suddenly grown teeth. "Terran," she said slowly. "I have never heard this word, and who are these beings?" "Unknown, Admiral, and our databases contain no information on any species called Terrans or any political entity called the Terran Union." This should not be possible, and Sirith knew the Galactic databases contained information on every spacefaring species within 50,000 light years, and yet here was a vessel crewed by complete unknowns responding to a distress call in the middle of nowhere. "Open a channel," Sirith commanded. "Channel. Open, Admiral. This is Admiral Sirith Velkan of the Valorian 4th Expeditionary Fleet, and I thank you for responding to our signal, but I must ask how you came to be in this region of space, because our charts show no inhabited systems within 12,000 light years." There was a pause, and then the strange, harsh voice returned. "We were exploring, Admiral, and humanity likes to know what is out there, so we send ships to look around, and we heard someone calling for help, so we came to see if we could do something useful." Sirith exchanged confused glances with her officers. "You came 12,000 light years from your territory simply to explore?" she asked. "Actually, we came about 15,000 light years, but who was counting?" The voice replied, and there was something in the tone that might have been humor. "Now, Admiral, your signal mentioned you were under attack, and I need to know what we are dealing with here." Sirith felt a strange mix of hope and concern, because this unknown vessel had no idea what it was flying into. "The enemy is called the Kethari, and they have 200 warships pursuing us, and they adapt to any weapon used against them. Within hours, and we have lost over 200 vessels attempting to fight them." She paused and forced herself to continue. "I appreciate your willingness to help, but you should leave this area immediately, because your single vessel cannot possibly make a difference, and you will only add to the death toll." There was another pause, and when the voice returned, it carried a tone that Sirith did not recognize at first. It took her a moment to realize it was confidence. "Admiral, I am not alone, and the rest of my fleet is about 4 hours behind me, and we have 32 ships in total." 32 ships, Sirith replied, and she could not keep the despair from her harmonics. "The Kethari have 200, and your fleet will be destroyed, alongside mine." "Maybe," the voice said, but we have dealt with bad odds before, and we did not come all this way to run away from a fight. You do not understand, Cirith insisted. The Kethari adapt to energy weapons, and they learn and evolve, and nothing we have used against them works anymore. Admiral, the voice said slowly, I need you to trust me on something, and can you do that? Cirith hesitated because she had no reason to trust this stranger, and yet something in the voice made her want to believe. I am listening, she said. Humanity has been fighting wars since before we figured out how to make fire, and we have spent our entire history finding new and creative ways to kill things that are trying to kill us. I do not see how this is relevant. The relevance, Admiral, is that we have a lot of experience dealing with enemies that adapt, and the secret is to give them so many different things to adapt to that they cannot keep up. The voice paused, and when it continued, there was something cold and ancient in its tone. Your enemy uses energy weapons, so you developed energy defenses, and when you attacked with energy weapons, they adapted to counter you. And this makes sense, because that is how advanced warfare works. Yes, Cirith agreed. Well, Admiral, humanity is not that advanced, and we still use rocks. Cirith's harmonics wavered with confusion. I do not understand. We have weapons that are just lumps of metal moving very fast, and there is no frequency to adapt to and no energy signature to analyze, and just pure physics and mass and velocity. That sounds incredibly primitive. It is. The voice agreed cheerfully. It is also incredibly effective, and try adapting to a tungsten rod, moving at 30% of light speed, because the only defense is to not be where it is going to hit. Cirith stood in silence as she processed this information, and part of her wanted to dismiss these strangers as fools who did not understand what they were facing, but another part of her remembered that her sophisticated weapons had failed completely, and perhaps there was wisdom in simplicity. I would like to see your vessel, Cirith said finally, and I would like to meet you in person if possible. That can be arranged, Admiral, and I will shuttle over to your ship within the hour, and we can discuss strategy. I must warn you that Valorians are quite different from what you might expect, Admiral. The voice replied, and there was definitely humor in it now. I'm about to fly into a battle against an enemy that has wiped out most of your fleet, and meeting new species is literally the least scary thing I will do today. The channel closed, and Cirith turned to her officers. What do we know about electromagnetic spectrum civilizations? She asked. Very little, Admiral. Her science officer replied, species that rely on such primitive communication methods are generally considered too undeveloped for contact, and we avoid them until they mature. And yet these Terrans have faster than light travel, and they patrol regions of space that we considered empty. It is possible, Admiral, that we have made some incorrect assumptions about what constitutes development. 1 hour later, a small shuttle detached from a vessel that Cirith could now see on her sensors, and the ship called Stubborn Defiance was ugly and brutal, and covered with weapons that looked crude and dangerous. The shuttle landed in the Eternal Chorus docking bay, and when the doors opened, Admiral Cirith got her first look at a human being. The creature was small and soft, and had no crystalline structure at all, and it walked on 2 legs with a strange, confident stride, and its face was mobile and expressive in ways that Cirith found almost disturbing. Admiral Velkan, the human said, and it extended one of its manipulator limbs toward her. I am Captain Elena Vasquez, and I am very pleased to meet you. Cirith looked at the extended limb and then at the human's face. What am I supposed to do with your limb? She asked the human. Made a sound that Cirith would later learn was called laughter. It is called a handshake, Admiral, and it is how humans greet each other, but we can skip it if you prefer. I believe I would prefer to skip it, yes. Fair enough, the human said and lowered her limb. Now let us talk about how we are going to save your people. And despite everything, Cirith felt something she had not felt in weeks. She felt hope. Admiral Seraph Velkan stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched her fleet die. The Vud's eternal chorus had been the pride of the Valorian Navy for 300 years, and now its crystal walls flickered with damage warnings and emergency alerts. That sang in frequencies of pure despair. Cyrith was not made of flesh like lesser species, but of living crystal that hummed with ancient harmonics and rite. Now every frequency in her body vibrated with grief and exhaustion through the massive viewing portal. She could see the wreckage of her once mighty armada and ships that had taken decades to grow from seed crystals, now drifted as broken husks in the cold void of space. The Valorians had ruled their region of the galaxy for 12,000 years, and they had built an empire of music and light where ships sang to each other across the darkness and cities resonated with the harmonies of a billion crystalline souls. They had never known true war, and they had never needed to learn violence, because their technology was so advanced that no species had ever threatened them. Until the Cathari came, no one knew where the Cathari originated, and some said they came from the void between galaxies, while others claimed they crawled out of a dimension of pure hunger. Their ships were black as the space between stars, and they made no sound and sent no signals and responded to no attempts at decent communication. They simply arrived and consumed and moved on. Cyrith had commanded 340 warships when the Cathari first appeared in Valorian space, and she had been confident in her fleet's power because the resonance cannons of the Valorian Navy could shatter moons and the harmonic shields could deflect any known weapon. But the Cathari learned it after every battle. They adapted, and they analyzed the frequencies of Valorian weapons and developed counters within hours. The resonance cannons that had destroyed 12 Cathari ships in the first engagement became useless by the third, and the harmonic shields that had protected the fleet were now penetrated with casual ease. Cyrith had lost 293 ships in 6 weeks of running battles, and the 47 vessels that remained were damaged and low on power and crewed by exhausted officers who had watched their friends die. But the warships were not what kept Cyrith awake during the brief rest periods. She allowed herself behind the defensive formation of her remaining combat vessels. Floated 15 massive transport ships, and inside those transports huddled 12 million Valorian civilians. They were the survivors of 4 colony worlds that the Cathari had stripped bare, and Cyrith had managed to evacuate them before the enemy arrived. But now the transports were failing. Admiral, her communications officer, called out in a harmonic tone heavy with fatigue. The transport Singing Dawn reports critical fractures in her jump core, and she cannot survive another faster than light transit. Cyrith closed her optical sensors for a moment and allowed herself one breath of despair before she opened them again. "How many transports can still jump?" she asked. 7, Admiral, and the other 8 would break apart. If they attempted it, 7 transports could carry perhaps 5 million refugees, and that meant 7 million souls would be left behind when the Cathari arrived. The tactical display showed the enemy fleet as a swarm of black dots moving steadily closer, and there were over 200 Cathari vessels hunting them. Mauserath had studied the enemy carefully over the past weeks, and she had learned one terrible truth about them. The Cathari did not take prisoners, and they did not negotiate. And they did not show mercy. When they caught the refugee fleet, they would kill everyone, and they would do it efficiently and without emotion, because to the Cathari other species were simply resources to be processed. How long until they reach US? Cyrith asked. 6 hours, Admiral, and perhaps 7 if we deploy mines to slow them. 6 hours, and Cyrith had no weapons that could hurt the Cathari anymore, and no shields that could stop them, and no allies who could reach them in time. The Valorian homeworld was 8,000 light years away, and even if they received her distress signals, they could not send help fast enough. Cyrith walked to the center of her bridge and looked at her crew, and she saw the fear in their flickering crystal forms, but she also saw determination and loyalty. They would fight, and they would die, and they would do it with the dignity that 12,000 years of civilization had taught them. But they would still die, and so would 12 million innocent people. Open a channel to all ships, Cirith commanded, and her voice carried the harmonic authority of an admiral who had served for 2 centuries. This is Admiral Velkan, and I will not deceive you about our situation because you deserve the truth. And the truth is that we cannot win this battle. She paused and let the weight of her words settle over the fleet. The Cathari will be here in 6 hours, and we do not have weapons that can stop them. But we have something more important than weapons. Her harmonic shifted to a frequency of fierce pride. We have duty and we have honor, and we have 12 million of our people, depending on us to buy them every possible second of life. The transports that can still jump will do so in 5 hours, and they will carry as many refugees as they can hold, and the rest of us will stay and fight. We will not win, but we will make the enemy pay for every ship they destroy, and we will give our people time, and when histories of our civilization are written, they will say that the 4th Expeditionary Fleet did not run and did not surrender and did not abandon those they were sworn to protect. She ended the transmission and turned to her communications officer. There is one more thing I want you to do, she said. And I know it seems pointless, but do it anyway. Admiral, send a distress signal on all frequencies, and I mean all frequencies, including the primitive electromagnetic spectrum that civilized species abandoned thousands of years ago. The officer's crystal form flickered with confusion. Admiral, those frequencies are only used by species so primitive they have not yet discovered harmonic communication, and there are no such species within 10,000 light years of our position. I know, Cirith replied. But we have nothing left to lose, and perhaps somewhere out there someone is listening. The officer nodded and began the transmission, and across every frequency, from the elegant harmonics of advanced civilization to the crude radio waves of primitive technology, a single message went out into the void. It was a cry for help and a song of desperation and a prayer to any being that might hear. Cirith did not expect an answer because the universe was vast and cold and empty, and miracles did not happen to people who needed them most. But she had to try, because trying was all she had left. She stood on her bridge and watched the Cathari grow closer, and she prepared herself to die with dignity. She did not know that 12,000 light years away in a region of space, the Valorian charts marked as unexplored, a small fleet of primitive ships had just detected her signal. She did not know that those ships belonged to a species that had never been contacted by the galactic community because they were considered too young and too violent and too dangerous to approach. She did not know that this species had a very simple philosophy when it came to distress signals. They answered them every single time, no matter the cost. Admiral Cirith Volcan did not know that humanity was coming. But humanity was coming anyway. Captain Elena Vasquez walked through the crystalline corridors of the Eternal Chorus, and she studied everything with the sharp eyes of a soldier who had learned that details could save your life. The Valorian ship was beautiful in a way that human vessels would never be, and the walls sang with subtle harmonies, and the light refracted through crystal structures and patterns that seemed almost alive. But Elena had not come here to admire the architecture. Admiral Cirith led her to a tactical planning chamber, and the room was filled with Valorian officers who stared at Elena with obvious curiosity and perhaps a little fear. Elena did not blame them because she knew how strange humans must appear to beings made of living crystal. This is our situation, Cirith said, and she activated a holographic display that showed the positions of both fleets. The Podestable Valorian ships were clustered in a defensive formation around the civilian transports, and they looked battered and broken and tired. The Cathari fleet was a spreading stain of black dots moving steadily closer. We have 47 combat vessels remaining, Sirith continued, and only 31 are fully operational, and our weapons are ineffective against the enemy due to their FIO. Adaptive capabilities. Elena nodded and studied the display carefully. Tell me about your weapons, she said. Our primary armament is the resonance cannon, which generates focused, harmonic frequencies that can shatter matter at the molecular level. And against unshielded targets, it is devastatingly effective. But the Cathari adapted. Yes, Sirith said, and her harmonics carried deep frustration. Within 3 engagements, they had developed countermeasures that reduced our cannon effectiveness by 90%. What about your shields? Our harmonic shields project a frequency barrier that disrupts incoming energy weapons, Sirith explained. But the Cathari have learned to tune their weapons to pierce our shields with minimal resistance. Elena walked around the tactical display, and her mind was already racing through possibilities. Your entire military doctrine is based on energy manipulation, she said, and it was not a question. Yes, and it is the foundation of all advanced warfare, and every civilized species uses some form of energy-based combat, and every civilized species would have the same weakness against an adaptive enemy. Sirith paused, and her crystal form flickered with something that might have been embarrassment. I had not considered that perspective. Do not feel bad, Admiral, because it makes perfect sense when you think about it. And if everyone you fight uses the same basic technology, then you only need to develop counters to that technology. Elena turned to face the assembled Valorian officers. Humanity is different, she said, and I need you to understand how different because it will affect how we fight together. Please explain, Sirith said. Humans have been killing each other since before we had language, Elena began. And our history is basically one long story of finding new ways to hurt people who are trying to hurt us. Several Valorian officers made sounds of discomfort, but Elena continued, we developed swords and spears, and then we developed armor to stop swords and spears. So we developed crossbows and guns to pierce armor, and then we developed better armor. So we developed explosives and tanks and aircraft. She paused to let this sink in. Every time we created a defense, someone created a new attack, and every time we created an attack, someone created a new defense, and this process has been going on for about 10,000 years. That sounds exhausting, one of the officers said. It is. Elena agreed, but it means that humanity has a lot of experience dealing with enemies who adapt, and the answer is simple and brutal. What is the answer? Sirith asked. Redundancy and variety. Elena said, you hit them with everything at once, and you do not give them time to adapt to one thing before you hit them with something completely different. She pulled up a schematic of a human warship on the tactical display, and the Valorian officers leaned forward with obvious curiosity. This is a standard Terran destroyer, Elena explained, and noticed that it has 6 different weapon systems. She highlighted each one as she spoke. Kinetic impactors, which are just dense metal rods, accelerated to high velocity, and nuclear missiles, which use fusion reactions to generate massive explosions, and plasma cannons, which are similar to your energy weapons, but less sophisticated. Continue, Sirith said. Laser batteries for point defense and railguns for medium-range engagement, and finally, CONVNT, IOL chemical explosives for close combat. That seems inefficient, a Valorian tactical officer observed. Your vessels must require enormous amounts of maintenance with so many different systems. They do, Elena admitted, and our ships break down constantly and require regular repairs, and our logistics chains are nightmares to manage. Then, why do you maintain such complexity? Elena smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Because when one weapon stops working, we switch to another, and when that stops working, we switch again, and we keep switching until we find something that hurts the enemy. She zoomed in on the kinetic impactor system. But I want to focus on this because I think it will be our most effective weapon against the Cathari. Explain how it works. It is embarrassingly simple, Elena said. We take a rod of tungsten about 2 meters long, and we accelerate it using electromagnetic rails until it is moving at roughly 30% of light speed. And then what? Sirith asked. Then we pointed at something we do not like, and we let physics do the rest, and there is no warhead and no explosive charge, and just mass times velocity. How can something so simple be effective against advanced defenses? Because there is nothing to adapt to, Elena said. Your energy shields analyze incoming frequencies and generate counters. But our kinetic impactors have no frequency, and they are just metal moving very fast. She brought up a simulation that showed what happened when a kinetic impactor struck a target. The Valorian officers watched in horrified fascination as the simulated ship simply ceased to exist. The impact releases energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, Elena explained, and the only way to stop it is to not be where it is going to hit. That is barbaric, Sirith said quietly. Yes, it is, Elena agreed, and it is also effective, and right now effective matters more than elegant. There was a long moment of silence as the Valorian officers processed what they had learned, and Elena could see them struggling with the implications. There is something else you need to understand, Elena said finally. What is that? Human ships are not like Valorian ships, and we do not expect them to survive every battle, and we build them to be replaced because we know that war means losses. Sirith's harmonic shifted to something cold. You are saying that your ships are expendable. I am saying that humans are willing to trade ships for victory, and if ramming one of our destroyers into a Cathari command ship will win the battle, then we will do it without hesitation. That is insane. That is how we survived as a species, Elena replied. And we were not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest animals on our homeworld, but we were the most stubborn. She met Sirith's gaze directly, and there was something ancient and dangerous in her eyes. The Cathari think they are predators, but they have never met a species that refused to accept defeat, and they have never met a species that would destroy itself to destroy its enemy. And humanity is such a species. Humanity invented the concept, Elena said, and we have a word for it, and we call it spite. Sirith stood in silence for a long moment, and when she spoke, her harmonics carried a complex mix of emotions that Elena could not fully interpret. I believe I am beginning to understand why your species was never contacted by the galactic community. Let me guess, Elena said, too primitive and too violent. Yes, and now you are glad we are here. Sirith made a sound that might have been a laugh. I am terrified that you are here, she said, but I am also grateful, and those two feelings do not contradict each other. Elena grinned, and it was a fierce expression, full of teeth. Then let us plan a battle, Admiral, and I promise you that when we are done, the Cathari will learn what it means to face humanity. And what does it mean to face humanity? Elena's grin widened. It means that surrender is the safest option, and unfortunately for them, they do not seem like the surrendering type. She cracked her knuckles, and the sound made several Valorian officers flinch. So we will have to do this the hard way. The Cathari fleet emerged from faster than light, travel with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat, and their 200 ships spread across the void like a dark stain growing larger with every passing second on the bridge of the Eternal Chorus. Admiral Sirith watched the enemy approach, and beside her stood Captain Vasquez with her strange soft face set in an expression of grim determination. They are not even bothering with formation, Sirith observed. They expect this to be easy. Good, Elena replied. Overconfident enemies make mistakes. The human fleet had arrived 3 hours earlier, and the 32 vessels now held position alongside the surviving Valorian warships, and together they formed a defensive line between the Cathari and the civilian transports. Human ships were ugly and brutal compared to the elegant crystal vessels of the Valorians, and they bristled with weapons and sensor arrays, and their hulls were thick and scarred from previous battles, but they were here, and they had come to fight, and that was what mattered. All ships report ready. Elena's communications officer announced through the link to the stubborn Defiance. The fleet is awaiting your orders, Captain. Elena looked at Cirith. Admiral, this is your sector and your people, and I think you should give the order. Cirith's harmonic shifted with surprise. You would defer to me. You have been fighting these things for weeks, and you know them better than we do, and besides, this is a joint operation, and we should act like it. Cirith nodded slowly and opened the channel to both fleets. All ships, this is Admiral Velkan, and the enemy is approaching, and we have 12 million civilians depending on us to hold this line. She paused and looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Today we fight alongside a species called humanity, and they have come a very long way to help us, and I ask all Valorian crews to follow their lead and trust their tactics. The Cathari have never faced an enemy like the humans, and today they will learn that the universe is larger and more dangerous than they ever imagined. She straightened her crystal form, and her harmonics rang with fierce determination. All ships engage at will, and may the harmonies guide us. The Cathari fleet accelerated toward the defensive line, and the lead ships opened fire with weapons that flickered with dark energy, and the shots tore through the void with terrible speed. Several Valorian ships raised their harmonic shields, but the Cathari weapons sliced through them as if they were not there. Human fleet, Elena commanded, weapons free, and give them everything. The stubborn Defiance shuddered as its kinetic impactors fired, and tungsten rods streaked across the void at speeds that made them nearly invisible. The first Cathari destroyer took 17 impacts in 3 seconds, and its adaptive shields, which had been designed to counter sophisticated energy matrices, offered no resistance whatsoever to simple metal moving at relativistic speeds. The ship did not explode, and it did not break apart, and it simply ceased to exist as the kinetic energy tore it into atoms. For a moment the Cathari fleet actually hesitated, and ships that had been advancing confidently suddenly slowed as their collective intelligence tried to process what had just happened. Did you see that? One of Cirith's officers called out. They are confused, and they do not understand what hit them. Hit them again, Elena ordered. Do not give them time to think. The human fleet fired in volleys and kinetic impactors and nuclear missiles and plasma bolts and laser beams all streaked toward the enemy at the same time. The Cathari shields flickered wildly as they tried to adapt to multiple different weapon types simultaneously, and some ships managed to deflect the plasma and laser fire, but the kinetic impactors punched through regardless. In the first 5 minutes of the engagement, the human fleet destroyed 18 Cathari vessels, but the enemy recovered quickly, and their collective intelligence was analyzing the new threats and developing counters even as ships died around them. They're starting to evade, Cirith observed. They are learning to predict the kinetic impactor trajectories. Expected, Elena replied. Switch to pattern delta and randomize firing sequences. The human ships adjusted their tactics, and instead of firing in predictable volleys, they began launching weapons at irregular intervals and from multiple angles. At the same time, the Valorian ships added their own firepower, and even though their resonance cannons were mostly ineffective, the additional attacks forced the Cathari to divide their attention. A group of 30 Cathari ships broke away from the main fleet and curved around the defensive line, and they were heading for the civilian transports. We have a breakthrough, a Valorian officer shouted. Enemy vessels are moving toward the refugees. Human destroyers Silver Hammer and Unbroken Will, Elena commanded. Intercept and engage. 2 human ships peeled away from the formation and accelerated toward the enemy flankers, and they were outnumbered 15 to 1, but they did not hesitate. The Silver Hammer plunged into the middle of the Cathari formation, and her weapons fired continuously and nuclear. Missiles detonated among the enemy ships, while kinetic impactors tore holes in their hulls. The Cathari focused their fire on the Silver Hammer, and the human destroyer's shields failed within seconds, and her hull began to break apart under the concentrated assault. But the captain of the Silver Hammer had one final order. "All hands abandon ship," she commanded. "Helm set collision course for the largest enemy vessel." The crew evacuated in escape pods as the mortally wounded destroyer accelerated directly toward a Cathari heavy cruiser, and the enemy ship tried to evade, but there was not enough time and not enough space. The collision turned both vessels into an expanding cloud of debris, and the explosion caught 2 more Cathari ships in its radius. "The Silver Hammer is gone," Elena announced, and her voice was steady despite the loss. But she took 4 of them with her. Cirith stared at the tactical display with something approaching awe. "Your captain deliberately destroyed her own ship." "She saved the refugees," Elena replied. "That is what we came here to do." The battle raged for hours, and the human fleet fought with a ferocity that shocked both the Valorians and the Cathari when their kinetic impactors ran low. They switched to nuclear missiles, and when the missiles were gone, they used plasma cannons and lasers. And when those overheated, they closed the point blank range and kept fighting. The Cathari had never faced an enemy that refused to retreat and refused to surrender and refused to die quietly. They adapted to one weapon, and the humans switched to another, and they adapted to that, and the humans switched again, and always the humans kept attacking. 3 more human ships were destroyed, and each one took enemy vessels with them as their crews chose death over defeat. The Valorian fleet fought alongside their new allies, and even though their weapons were less effective, they served as distractions and decoys, and they drew fire away from the human ships. When naked Admiral Cirith watched one of her cruisers take a hit meant for a human destroyer, and she felt pride and grief. In equal measure, Admiral, her tactical officer, called out, "The enemy flagship has been identified, and it is hanging back from the main engagement, and we believe it. Coordinates the Cathari collective intelligence." Elena turned sharply. "If we destroy the flagship, will it disrupt their adaptation?" "Unknown," the officer admitted, "but it would certainly cause confusion." Elena looked at Cirith. "My ship can reach it, but we would have to break through their defensive line, and we might not survive." "You are asking my permission to attempt a suicide mission." "I am informing you of my intentions," Elena corrected, "and asking if you want to come along." Cirith's harmonics shifted to something that felt like fierce joy. "Yes, and I believe I would like that very much. Then let us end this." The stubborn defiance and the eternal chorus accelerated away from the main battle, and they plunged directly into the heart of the Cathari formation and every weapon. They had fired continuously as they flew enemy. Ships exploded around them, and their shields failed, and their hulls buckled, but they kept flying and kept fighting and kept pushing toward the flagship. "Hull breach on decks 7 and 8, the stubborn Defiance damage control officer reported. "We have fires in the engine room, and our port thrusters are offline." "Keep going," Elena ordered. The Cathari flagship loomed ahead of them, and it was massive and dark and covered with weapons that tracked their approach. "All kinetic impactors fire." "On my mark," Elena commanded. "We only have 4 rounds remaining." "Captain." "Then we make them count." The stubborn Defiance fired her last 4 impactors directly at the enemy flagship, and at the same time, the eternal chorus unleashed every resonance. Cannon she had left the Cathari. Flagship shields flared and flickered as they tried to counter the combined assault, and for a moment, it seemed like they would hold, but the kinetic impactors did not care about shields, and 2 of them punched through and tore into the heart of the enemy vessel. The flagship did not die immediately, and it hung in space trailing fire and debris, and its weapons fell silent as systems failed throughout its structure, and across the battlefield, the HFY fleet suddenly lost cohesion, and ships that had been moving in perfect coordination began to drift and wander, and their adaptive capabilities seemed to fail as the collective intelligence fragmented. "It is working," Sirith breathed. "They are confused and disorganized. All ships," Elena broadcast, "finish them." The combined human and Valorian fleet fell upon the disoriented HFY with savage efficiency, and what had? The void was quiet now, and where 200 HFY warships had swarmed with deadly intent, only debris remained, and the wreckage drifted. Silently in the gravitational shadow of the dead star, Admiral Sirith stood on the damaged bridge of the Eternal Chorus, and she looked out at the aftermath of the greatest battle she had ever witnessed. The Valorian fleet had lost 12 more ships in the fighting, and over 3,000 of her people had died defending the civilian transports, but the transports had survived, and 12 million refugees were alive because of what had happened here today. The human fleet had paid an even higher price, and if 32 vessels, only 19 remained operational, and over 4,000 humans had given their lives for a species they had never met before. Captain Vasquez was in the medical bay of the Stubborn Defiance, overseeing the treatment of wounded from both fleets and human. Medics worked alongside Valorian healers, and together they saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. Sirith made her way through the damaged corridors of her ship, and she passed crews working to repair systems and seal breaches, and everywhere she looked, she saw exhaustion and grief and quiet pride. When she reached the docking bay, she found a human shuttle waiting, and a young officer escorted her aboard for the short flight to the Stubborn Defiance. The human ship was even more damaged than her own, and entire sections had been sealed off due to hull breaches, and the corridors were filled with repair crews working frantically to keep critical systems online. Sirith found Elena in the medical bay as expected, and the human captain was sitting beside a bed where a wounded officer lay unconscious. "Captain Vasquez," Sirith said quietly. Elena looked up, and her face was tired and lined with grief, but she managed a small smile. "Admiral, and welcome aboard what is left of my ship." "How many did you lose?" 63 crew members died in the battle," Elena replied. "And another 40 are wounded, and some of them will not survive the journey home." "I am sorry." "Do not be," Elena said. "They knew what they were signing up for when they joined the Navy, and they died protecting people who needed help, and there is no better way to go." Sirith moved to stand beside her, and together they looked down at the wounded officer. "I have been trying to understand," Sirith said slowly, "why you came, and why you fought, and why so many of your people died for strangers. And have you figured it out?" "I have several theories, but none of them seem adequate." Elena was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice was soft. "Humanity is a young species, Admiral, and we have only been traveling among the stars for a few centuries, and everywhere we go, we find civilizations that are older and wiser and more advanced than we are." She paused and looked at Sirith directly. "But we also find that those civilizations are often alone, and they do not help each other, and they do not come when someone calls for aid, and they let their neighbors suffer and die because it is not their problem. That is the way of the universe." Sirith said, "Resources are limited and survival requires prioritizing your own kind." "Maybe," Elena agreed, "but humanity does not see it that way, and we believe that strength means nothing if you do not use it to help those who need it." She stood and walked to a viewing port, and through it they could see the refugee transports being escorted to safety by the combined fleet. "When I was young, my grandmother told me a story," Elena continued. "She said that humans used to live in small tribes, and each tribe had to fight for survival against the wilderness and against other tribes. That sounds difficult." It was, and many tribes died because they were too weak or too unlucky or too alone. What happened to change this? The tribes that survived were the ones that helped each other, Elena said. They formed alliances, and they shared resources, and they came to defend their neighbors when enemies attacked. She turned to face Sirith. Over time, those alliances became nations, and those nations became a global civilization, and eventually, we reached the stars, and through all of it, the lesson remained the same. What lesson? That we are stronger together than apart, and that helping others is not weakness, but wisdom, and that the universe is too big and too dangerous to face alone. Sirith's harmonic shifted to something warm and wondering. Your species is remarkable. Captain and I do not mean that as mere flattery. We are stubborn, Elena corrected, and we are loud and violent and messy, and we make mistakes all the time. And yet, you came. Yes, and we will always come, and that is who we are. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, and watched the stars through the damaged viewport. What will you do now? Sirith asked eventually. We will escort your refugees to safe territory, and then we will report back to command and tell them what happened here. Will there be consequences for engaging in an unauthorized battle? Elena laughed, and the sound was tired but genuine. Probably, but I do not care, and the Admiralty can yell at me all they want, and it will not change what we did or why we did it. And what about the Cathari? Sirith asked. The survivors fled, but they will return eventually, and they will be more prepared next time. Then we will be ready for them, Elena said simply, and we will not let them hurt anyone else if we can stop it. You cannot protect the entire galaxy. Watch us try. 2 weeks later, the combined fleet reached Valorian space, and the refugee transports were met by a massive, welcoming convoy that had traveled from the homeworld to receive them. Admiral Sirith stood on the bridge of the Eternal Chorus and watched the reunion, and families that had been separated found each other again, and children who had thought they would never see their parents embraced them with desperate relief. Beside her, Captain Vasquez watched with a soft expression on her strange alien face. This is why we fight, Elena said quietly. Not for glory or territory or power, but for this, and for moments when people get to hold the ones they love again. Sirith's harmonics rang with deep emotion. The Valorian Concordat will not forget what humanity did here, she said. And when the Council asks for my report, I will tell them that we have found something precious in the void. And what is that? Friends, Sirith replied. And we have found friends who come when called, and who fight beside strangers, and who die for people they have never met. She turned to face Elena directly. Whatever humanity needs in the future, the Valorian people will provide. And this is not a political alliance or a trade agreement, but a promise. Elena extended her hand again, and this time, Sirith understood the gesture, and she reached out with her own crystalline limb and grasped the human's soft fingers. Partners, Elena said. Partners, Sirith agreed as the human fleet prepared to depart. Sirith composed a message to the Valorian High Council, and it contained her official report and her tactical analysis and her recommendations for future contact with humanity. But it also contained a personal note that she asked to be distributed throughout Valorian space. It reads simply, we have discovered a new species called humanity, and they are primitive by our standards and violent by any measure, and they frighten me in ways I cannot fully express. But they are also the most loyal and courageous beings I have ever encountered, and they came to help us when no one else would, and they died for us without hesitation or regret. The galaxy should know that humanity has arrived, and they have chosen to be protectors rather than conquerors, and helpers rather than exploiters. If you ever find yourself in danger, and if all hope seems lost, send a signal and pray that the humans hear it, because they will come and they will fight and they will not stop until you are safe. That is their nature, and that is their gift to the universe. And I, for one, am grateful beyond words that they exist. The message spread across Valorian space, and from there it spread to other civilizations and to other regions of the galaxy, and everywhere it went beings looked up at the stars and wondered about the strange, violent primitive species that had decided to spend their strength helping others. Some thought it was foolish, and some thought it was naive, and some thought it was a trap or a deception, but others remembered times when they had needed help, and no one had come, and they thought perhaps humanity had the right idea. After the centuries that followed, humanity encountered many species and many civilizations, and not all of those encounters were peaceful. But word spread through the galaxy about what had happened at the dead star and about the species that answered distress calls and fought beside strangers and died for people they had never met. And when beings needed help, they began to call for humanity, and humanity always answered every single time, no matter the cost, because that was who they were, and that was who they would always be.